You say you are a management firefighter. What is management firefighting?
Management firefighting is fixing a program or organization that is losing money, behind schedule, technically deficient, or in some other way not getting the job done.
Oh. Okay. But how do you start to fix something like that?
Well, it all depends on what needs to be fixed. To fix an organization that is in trouble is different than fixing a program that is in trouble. So, let's start with the example of a program. Most often when a program is in trouble, multiple things are evident at the same time. And these things usually happen in the following order. It gets behind schedule, the customer gets upset, then it starts to lose money with evidence of some technical problem or problems. Next, the company gets worried, then the program gets further behind schedule, starts losing more money, and both the customer and the company get really upset. It's not unusual for at least one replacement of the program manager during a troubled program. After this happens, is usually when I get called in.
Okay. I understand. But what do you do?
Of course, the first thing I do is assess what is really going on. I ask questions of lots and lots of people on the program, including the customer, not just the management team, and review all the program's plans, methods, and technical approaches used to adhere to the plans. Usually, I find that the personnel are demoralized and that leadership, across the board, is lacking in experience. One thing I've learned over the years is the following: never confuse someone's title with experience, ability, talent, or competence. A couple of examples of what I mean. First, many times a person with really good technical skills is promoted to a management position as a type of reward. Since this technical person has never had any management training or experience, they are like a fish out of water. You wouldn't hire an electrician to fix a plumbing problem, would you? Another critical issue to be addressed on this subject is, let's call it, the motivation of the manager. A manager must have the skills and desires to manage the normal operations and issues that crop up associated with the technical, cost, schedule, personnel, and customer interface aspects of all that is going on. If a person does not have the desires or capabilities to address all of these, he or she, most likely, will not make a good manager. Second, people tend to hire or promote people they like, not necessarily the people best suited for the job. In both cases, these new managers hire subordinate managers who have even less experience than the hiring manager, have. It's a vicious cycle leading to problems.
Well, what about personnel demoralization issues? What causes that?
Usually when things are not going well, the inexperienced manager tries to find someone to blame. The manager's boss is looking for what went wrong. So, the manager blames his or her employees. Susie doesn't know what she's doing, Bob is lazy, etc. They have forgotten, or never learned, the first rule of good leadership is to take blame and to give credit.
Well, what about the customer?
That's a really important part of the fixing process. Consider, the company is in the program for the most buck for the bang, while the customer looks for the most bang for the buck. This, of course, makes for differing goals between customer and the company. This conflict needs to be minimized as much as possible. The customer knows that, if the program fails, he or she is not going to fare well with their bosses. So, get with the customer and find ways that both he or she and the company's manager can get promoted. This means that both the customer and the company have to have as their mutual goals the success of the program.
That sounds good. But what does that really mean?
That means that both sides have to make concessions. Some of the necessary concessions may, at first, seem less than desirable. However, if failure is the only option without them, it gets easier to convince someone.
What have you found that most often causes cost and schedule problems?
Well, the personnel issues certainly don't help. But, the initial drivers to cost and schedule issues stem from two things: requirements definition problems and inaccurate or inexperienced estimating of the job to be done. First, requirements issues. Most often a contract is written for the job to be done based on a set of requirements. Once the contract is signed by both parties, any change to the original requirements will require a contract change. This is a costly and time-consuming effort. So, absolute clarity of what is desired is mandatory for a good requirements definition. Unfortunately, this is next to impossible to accomplish. Let me give you a facetious example. You want a new front door for your home. You sign a contract with a supplier to provide and install a door that you picked out from a magazine with a brass doorknob. After installation, you discover that the door does not have a lock. Well, you didn't ask for a brass doorknob with a lock. Yes, it's a silly example, but I think you can see that with very large and complex set of requirements, such ambiguity of requirements would cause issues all over the program. And, with each requirement issue being dealt with, sometimes all at once, time and money would be consumed at an increasingly faster rate. Now for an accurate estimating. Frequently, the original estimate for getting the job done is actually made by persons who never wind up on the job. These estimators have experiences that the people eventually assigned to the job do not. For example, if I have built something before just like what is being asked for, I will know things I did wrong before and how I fixed them. Therefore, my estimate may be great for me, but not for someone else. Even if I'm to be on the new effort, things crop up that make the original estimate inaccurate. Therefore, my original assumptions for getting the job done are now not applicable. So, is it a bad estimate or an estimate that is no longer viable? Often, both things are happening at once.
What can be done about all this?
The real trick is to always know exactly how far along you are in the progress of the effort. This is not always easy and causes further personnel issues.
What do you mean further personnel issues?
What often happens is this. When schedule issues hit the manager, he or she correctly will seek to find out what's going wrong. Often the person or persons behind schedule will be treated badly by the manager. Remember the point about taking blame and giving credit. Anyway, no one likes to be yelled at. The employee may not actually know where they are along the schedule, or will tell the manager what he or she wants to hear out of fear of some type of retribution. Fear spreads among employees. So, if one is not careful, the personnel issues can become so widespread that only a change in management will fix it. To alleviate this situation, a truly objective means of tracking progress is needed. With such, early warning signs will become apparent so that proper remedial actions may be taken to keep the effort on schedule.
What about technical issues? Surely someone like yourself doesn't have the necessary technical know-how to be able to address a wide variety of technical issues.
You are so correct, I don't. However, usually there is someone on the program who does. Seek them out. It really doesn't matter what level the person is, if they know how to fix something, use them in their ideas, and don't forget to give credit to them. Doing so will start to help the personnel issues, merely because the level of fear will decrease, and the level of trust in management will increase. If there really isn't anybody there that can fix whatever is wrong, calling in a knowledgeable consultant is always a great option.
It sounds like there would be a whole lot of things that must be done at once. How is this accomplished?
Simply put, making the people involved feel that they truly can make a difference is mandatory. Just to let you know, there are more dynamics involved than what were discussed here. And, yes, there are many things that must be done simultaneously. How that is accomplished is the subject of another discussion. The last time we were discussing the dynamics of all that goes on while attempting to fix a program in trouble. So, let's continue.
Okay. I am interested in what actually goes on.
Before starting, I would like to point out that all that I discuss is the generalized case. Each specific management firefight has its own unique circumstances, but what I will address is found in most all such programs in trouble. Okay?
Yes, that's fine. I do understand what you mean.
The very first thing I do is to have a meeting with the program's management staff, and then, with all the personnel. This is to let them know what is going on and what they might expect. Without such an initial discussion, people tend to make up what's going to happen, and it is often wrong. After these 2 meetings, I have a discussion with the customer. I need the customer's perspective on what's happening as well as a sense of his or her, let's call it, mood. This is very critical to all that follows. I would prefer that the discussion of the customer interface be addressed later. Okay?
Okay.
When you first show up on a troubled program, what you find is the following: the employees and managers, alike, are not in a friendly mood. So, it's like walking into a somewhat hostile environment. I don't mean that the people are rude or antagonistic, although this does happen sometimes. Rather, mostly they are unsure and somewhat frightened about what changes might be forced upon them. And, more often than not, they are worried about where blame will fall. I assure them that it is my job to take any blame, and for them to get any credit. In order to gain the information needed to come up with a solution, one must first assure all the project's people that you truly are there to make their lives easier. Not necessarily having less work to do, but more that their work efforts will have recognized positive results.
I can imagine that doing so is not all that easy. How long does it take?
Actually, it goes on for quite a while. Some are receptive right away, some are very wary of anybody from upper management, and, yet, others tend to think that you can't possibly do any more than they have already done. You just take it one person at a time. One must be able to work with people of widely varying levels of trust in your motives and your abilities. That goes for the management team as well as all the employees. As mentioned when last we spoke, reviews are done of all program artifacts, that is, technical designs and approaches, accomplishment plans and schedules, process methods being used, financial reporting, contract adherence, etc. All this is done while pulsing the employees and managers as to what is actually going on. One set of questions to ask everybody is: 1. How do you know when you're done? 2. How do you know? 3. What does that mean? And 4. Can you show me? The process of asking these questions and the answers one gets is kind of like applying the Socratic method. Again, kind of. You would be surprised how difficult the answers to these questions can be if the program is not using objective means of measuring progress.
What do you mean?
To answer that, let me give an example. You are conducting a test on some component you are developing. It could be hardware or software, or anything else, for that matter. Without a defined and approved set of completion criteria, you would have no way of determining when you're done. You might think you're done, but you could not demonstrate how you know. Further, you probably have a schedule for completing the test. So, I ask you if you're on schedule. You answer yes. Then I ask you, how do you know? Without a defined, very numerous set of intermediate milestones with completion criteria for each one, all you can demonstrate is that you have started, not where you are now. Now, applying reason here, if the entire test is to take less than a day or so, then the time to create lots of these intermediate milestones would take longer than the testing. So, one has to be rather flexible and rational in asking these questions, and in what answers make good common sense. Applying common sense is critical in all aspects of management firefighting, and, for that matter, in everything we do. Since I would normally not be too close to the actual details of the program at this point, the answer to the "how do you know" question might not be clearly understood. So, I would then ask, what do you mean? The answer usually involves a detailed discussion to truly understand what they really mean. After the discussion of the answer, I would ask, can you show me? Showing actual artifacts of schedule adherence that make sense goes a long way to increased credibility of the person and their manager as to how they see that things are getting done on time. The reasonableness of the people's answers help a great deal in coming up with a set of solutions, and who, initially at least, can do it with the greatest expectation of success later. You would be surprised how many times I find that no one has ever asked people to justify their positions on something. I want to point out something here. I would have reviewed the methods employed on the program prior to pulsing the personnel. So, I already know if objective criteria is intended to be used or not. What I'm really looking for is each person's manner of dealing with the questions. Let's assume that a full set of objective criteria is not being used on the program, and, unfortunately, this is the normal case. A person may have been clever enough to have created their own. This makes them a good potential for later, helpful talent. Or they may attempt to snow me, that wouldn't work. But, I have that person calibrated, at least at first. Or, in fact, they may be just totally honest, again, making them a good potential for later, helpful talent.
You've mentioned methods quite a few times. What are you talking about specifically?
Reasonable question. I'm talking about the methodology, or ways, the program is to get the job done. Think of such a methodology as a very large recipe for a cake. Follow the instructions as written, and wind up with a beautiful cake. Don't follow them, and wind up with a mess. Most companies have a standard set of process manuals, or a methodology, that is supposed to be followed on all programs. I look to see if the program is using the standard, whether each person has access to a copy, and if some form of quality assurance is assuring their use. The truth of the matter is that programs in trouble tend not to use the company's standard methods. The exact reason why, even after dealing with such programs for many years, is unclear. I'll discuss more on this later. It doesn't matter how good a person is, or how good they think they are, a defined process to follow gives a checklist so one doesn't forget what to do when under stress.
What do you do if there is no defined process? I mean, that's possible, isn't it?
Having no defined process is rare, but it does happen. If the program really doesn't have one, I give them one. If the process they have is not adequate, I'd show them how to enhance it. The usual problem is they don't follow the one they have. So, in this case, I insist they use it, and I monitor that they do. When people are used to doing something one way and you insist they do it differently, personnel issues can arise. To solve this human condition takes lots of communication and coordination. In a management firefight, one is never bored.
I can believe you. Next time, let's discuss what you would consider a reasonable objective means of measuring progress and other stuff. Okay?
That's a good suggestion. Let's do it. Okay. Now, let's discuss what I mean by objective measurements relating to schedule tracking.
Great. The word objective is rather ambiguous to me in this context.
A very real problem facing management is to always know where along on the schedule the program is. Therefore, if one has the ability to remove most, if not all, of the subjectivity in schedule adherence, one is way ahead of the game. Not only does it make it easier to report progress, but the personnel have more time in actually doing the job versus trying to figure out what progress they've made or not made. There is no judgment, only objective evidence. Objective measurements have as their basis objective planning, of course. Each activity should have a start date, an end date, and a completion criteria defined for each activity. This seems rather obvious. However, the last piece, completion criteria, is very often missing. On a long-duration program, say, more than a few months, major activities should be broken down into many smaller activities, that is, no smaller activity should be more than 2 weeks in duration. This is a pain to plan out, but, in doing planning in this manner, not only do you have many minor milestones with which to track progress, you also will find planning errors. For example, you may find that a major activity has smaller activities within it that have results that are needed by someone else on the program. So, overall, the results of this level of planning can have beneficial impacts to the program as a whole. You get things done more when they are needed, rather than when they would, otherwise, become available. These smaller activities could be almost anything meaningful to the effort. A few examples of this are an in-progress review, a preliminary design of a minor component, a peer review, a document submitted for review, the completion of a review, as I said, almost anything. Let's assume that a program is planned out the way I described. Now, assign a value of 1 to start an activity and a value of 2 to complete an activity. One only gets credit for starting and completing per the completion criteria. There is no subjectivity involved. Also, for the critical activities along the way, one can, and should, assign a multiplier to each activity. More on this in a moment. Let's look at how this works. Assume that the plan for the program has, on the average, 200 things that are supposed to happen every week. This would be a combination of things starting and things completing. So, let's say that 1/2 are starts and 1/2 are completions. That says that, without any multipliers, the planned score each week should be 300. 100 points for the half that started, and 200 points for the half that completed. Got it?
Wait a minute. Oh. I see. Yes, I have it so far.
Okay. Now let's assume that for a given week only 85 actually start and all of the completions were met. In addition, 10 completions were accomplished this week that were held over from the week before due to their being late. Doing the math, this week's actual score is 305 versus the planned 300. This is good. But, last week's score was 280, that is, 10 completions were missed that week. So, what does this simple example tell us? Last week's score was 280, this week's score was 305, and the average score for the 2 weeks is 292.5. We are behind schedule, not by much, but we are behind. The key to using this type of method is trending. Or, how we are doing over the long haul. It is reasonable to assume that for some weeks the program is going to be behind schedule a bit, and for other weeks the program is going to be ahead a bit. As long as the trend is toward being on schedule, or ahead of schedule, all is fine. In using this approach, it is important that management not focus on any given week, but on the trending. If the scores for a given effort, small or large, are trending toward being behind schedule for 3 weeks or more, the scores will point directly as to where to look to see what might be done to fix any issues. Nobody wants to be hounded on a weekly basis for a few points off schedule. Remember, it's the trending that counts. Does that make sense so far?
Yes, it does. But, that seems like an awful lot of planning and tracking.
As to the planning, yes it is. But, the tracking becomes very easy. Each employee just fills in their status each week. They don't have to justify anything. They either started or they didn't, they either completed or they didn't.
Okay. You mentioned something about multipliers. What is that?
All right. Here goes. Take the same 300 score example from before. Let's say that of the 200 things to be accomplished, 10 starts and 10 completions were critical. So, multiply each of those activities' planned scores by 10, as an example. As an aside, one can and should use a wide range of multiplier values. After all, some things are more critical than others. Again, doing the math, this new status value says that the planned score for that week is 570 versus the original 300. Taking the same basic status as before, and assuming that of the original 15 that didn't start, 10 of these were deemed critical, then the new score for this week would be 490. Before, the program scored 305, 5 points ahead of schedule. Now this week's score is 80 points behind schedule. I know this sounds rather complicated. It's much easier to follow when you see it on paper. But, do you see how the application of multipliers can provide real focus on what is important?
Yeah. You are right. It would be easier to understand it if it were on paper. But, I think I get it. By the way, how is this specific use of objective measurement of progress received by people?
At first, both management and the personnel are wary. It is a change and people, in general, do not like change. After they've used it for a while, and see how easy it is on them, they come around. Customers love it, because it doesn't require a lot of explaining. The status is what it is, objectively. They feel, correctly, that they really have a handle on how things are going. On the troubled program, it is often the first time they have had such a level of confidence. I won't get into this now, but in programs where the customer is the federal government, they require many cumbersome reporting methods which this scheme makes much easier to administer. I think we are done for now.
So, what will we cover next time?
I think we should cover the real and central issue that causes problems in both programs and organizations alike. Okay?
Sounds like the right thing to talk about. See you next time.